Well, the legend of the Loch Ness Monster continues to captivate. Hundreds showed up to search for the mythical creature in the Scottish Highlands over the weekend. They say this is the biggest Nessie hunt in more than 50 years.
Have you ever wondered what really hides in the dark waters of Loch Ness? People have said they see something for years, like a monster, a shadow, or a shape.
Suddenly, there was a huge splashing about sound coming from the marina. It was very alarming because it was so huge, it seemed to be stirring up the loch.
Now, though, a brand new picture has everyone talking. It's sharp and clear, and the details will give you chills when you zoom in. Is this the proof we've been looking for? You won't want to miss what's coming next, so stay put. The legend and the loch. The Loch Ness Monster story didn't start with fuzzy pictures or videos that went viral. It began more than 1,500 years ago, when people who lived a long time before people today even thought about cryptids carved it into stone. The Picts were a curious group of people who lived in what is now northern Scotland. They left behind stones with strange drawings on them, like bodies that seemed to float through water that they couldn't see. These carvings, which date back to around 500 AD, make up about 40% of all known Pictish stones. That number tells you something by itself. Whatever these things were, the people who lived by the Highlands' dark seas cared about them. Others in the field of history say they're just mythical or powerful animals that serve as symbols. Others see more. A history of sightings that has been passed down from generation to generation. The first clues to a secret that still has the whole world in its grip. A few hundred years later, the same puzzle showed up in one of the first written accounts of a beast in the loch. Saint Columba, a famous Irish monk from the 6th century, stood on the banks of the River Ness. He wasn't looking for scary things. He was there to bury someone. But stories about what he saw have been told over and over for over 1,000 years. The story goes that a man was attacked while swimming. He was pulled under and hit by what people in the area called a water beast. Columba raised his hand and told the thing to go away. He was cool and in charge. The people who saw the beast thought it was real and thought it was dangerous, strong, and scary. Over time, the story became less clear about whether it was true or not, but the seed was set. The people who went near the water knew that something lived there. You need to know about Loch Ness to understand why the story has stuck around for so long. It's not just a lake. It's a huge, old trench that was made by ice and goes through the Scottish Highlands for more than 22 miles. The water is very dark, almost black, because peat from the hills has washed down into it. There are hidden trenches and winding channels that make it hard to see more than a few feet below the surface. It goes down 788 feet. The loch's weather can change quickly from calm to stormy, and the water's surface can ripple and twist at any time. It's the perfect setting for stories that mix truth and fear, fact and fiction. It's dark, quiet, and never-ending. But people keep coming back for another reason. It's not just where they live. It's in their minds. We are hardwired to look for patterns, to make sense of the unknown, and to want to be a part of events that are bigger than ourselves. In a cold, deep loch, Nessie is more than just a creature. It's an idea, a live question mark. Every wave, shadow, and splash that can't be explained makes you think, what if? One thing that scientists, skeptics, and believers all agree on is that Loch Ness is made in a way that makes people think. It's far enough away to feel pristine, deep enough to keep secrets, and wide enough to make you think that something amazing might be just around the corner. This part is even more interesting because even though the story is old, The proof that followed made the quiet Scottish loch the center of one of the most enduring mysteries in history. The sightings that followed would turn whispers into news stories. Sightings through the ages. Few people had ever seen or heard of Nessie before the first modern person did so in the early 1870s, decades before the name Nessie became famous. A man named D. Mackenzie was walking along the shore near Alduri sometime between October 1871 and October 1872. He saw what looked like a floating log moving across the loch. The water was calm, and the sky was pale in the highlands. It didn't seem strange at first. The log then came to life. It rose, moved quickly, and cut through the water, leaving a wake of white foam. In 1934, after news of other reports spread like wildfire, Mackenzie wrote a letter in which he talked about what he had seen. This was more than 60 years after the event. Others later said the same thing. It looked like an upside-down boat, was smooth, dark, and moving too fast to be possible. Skeptics said the story wasn't reliable because it came so late. But his account is still interesting because it is so simple and clear. It seemed too much like what was going to happen next to ignore. In the summer of 1933, everything changed. British investor George Spicer was driving with his wife along the narrow road that runs along the eastern shore of the loch on July 22. Something huge came out of the bushes in front of them. The sun was high and the road was empty. Spicer talked about a strange creature that was unlike anything he had ever seen. It had a big, dark body, a long, snake-like neck that rose high above the ground, and something in its mouth that looked eerily like a small animal, maybe even a lamb. Before disappearing into the loch with a sudden rippling splash, it crossed the road in front of their car. It was fast but heavy, moving with a strange, deliberate ease. Spicer said it looked like the most primitive animal he could think of. Just those few seconds of shock and confusion sent shock waves around the world like a thunderclap. The story was in newspapers, and within days, reporters, tourists, and people looking for thrills flocked to the highlands. From being a quiet, creepy body of water, Loch Ness became the center of attention around the world. The monster had a name for the first time. More and more reports came in from fishermen, drivers, and people who had lived by the loch their whole lives. Some people said they saw bumps on the top. Others said they had heard splashes in the middle of the night or seen waves move against the flow of water when there was nothing to show for them. But there was one sighting, just a few months after the Spicers, that would forever change people's minds about Nessie. Arthur Grant, a young veterinary student, was riding his motorbike along the narrow, winding road near the loch early in the morning on January 5, 1934. It was a clear, cold night, and the headlights cut through the darkness. Suddenly, something ran across the road in front of them. Grant hit the brakes hard and skidded to a stop a few yards from the thing. He would never forget what he saw. A big, dark animal with a long neck and a head that turned toward him was in his light beam. It then quietly slid down the bank into the water. Grant drew what he saw the next day because he knew a lot about anatomy and liked to pay attention to details. The sketch was very clear and showed a strong animal with a long neck and a head balanced at the end of it. It looked a lot like the plesiosaurs that lived in the sea in the past. That picture helped people remember what the monster looked like. From then on, Nessie wasn't just a story. She was a shape, a figure that people all over the world knew. Why are these early reports so interesting? Because they fit together, even though they happened years apart, and by people who have never met. The main features of Mackenzie's upturned boat, Spicer's prehistoric creature, and Grant's plesiosaur-like animal are a long neck, a big, heavy body, dark skin, and a size that doesn't make sense. It wasn't a small thing. It was more than just a shadow or a splash. It was big, easy to see, and moving in a planned way. Patterns started to show up over time. These are still being studied by experts today. The water was moved in a certain way. There were these strange bumps moving just below the surface. The impossible quiet that came before and after each show. That being said, there is also something else that goes beyond the physical images. Each of these witnesses talked about the same disturbing mix of fear and awe, as well as the clear knowledge that they were seeing something they couldn't easily explain. Still, these reports were just the start. Over the next few decades, more witnesses came forward with stories that were just as vivid, and some were even more detailed. But none of them were as haunting and unforgettable as what happened that summer day in 1952. A close-up encounter that was so intense and scary that it would affect those who lived through it for the rest of their lives. The Greta Finlay encounter. Ulduri Pier on the eastern shore of Loch Ness was opened on August 20, 1952. It was a sunny and calm summer day. The only sounds that broke the silence were the soft sounds of water hitting the pier and the calls of birds in the highlands. The quiet of the loch made the air feel heavy. After setting up their small caravan, Greta Finlay stepped outside to enjoy the peace. Her 13-year-old son Harry sat nearby with his fishing rod, looking for even the tiniest wave in the water. At that very moment, there was no sign that they were about to have one of the strangest and scariest experiences ever recorded at Loch Ness. Then it began. A strange slapping sound resounded across the water. It wasn't the steady wake of a boat, but sharp, jerky movements that were loud enough to be heard. The sound kept going, so at first it was easy to think it was a big fish breaking the surface. She stood there and listened, but her eyes kept going to the water about 20 yards away. What was once a calm surface now looked like it was living. Her world changed in an instant. What came up out of the water went against everything they knew. It was clear what they were seeing from that close a distance. In the pale sunlight, a long neck stood straight up, perfectly straight. The skin was dark, smooth, and slippery, almost slimy. It had a strange sheen that made Greta think it looked like a snail's body. There was a small but clear head at the top of the neck. It had two short branches that stuck up, and the tips of each were rounded and bulb-like. It didn't look like any animal they knew, and it got stranger as they looked at it. They were frozen as the thing lingered. It didn't run away quickly. It did not fail. A strange calm moved it, making small changes in the water that made waves that hit the pier. Greta thought the area she could see above the water was at least 15 feet long. The body below could have been much bigger, though, because it was covered by the dark, deep water. Mother and son watched for a few minutes without moving, as every detail burned into their minds. The shape of the neck, the shiny skin, and the projections that looked like aliens. When they saw what they saw, they were both scared and amazed. They were so shocked that they couldn't even think about the camera that was sitting in the caravan just a few feet away, useless. The thing finally moved, and it was quiet and smooth as it slid slowly below the water, leaving only a shaky trail behind it. There was silence in the loch again, like nothing had ever been there. But the Finlays knew that moment would stay with them forever. Greta had a crippling fear that she would have a hard time putting into words later on. Harry, on the other hand, was so scared that he never went fishing again. Even though he didn't talk about that day for years, what he saw didn't go away. Researchers found out about the Finlay sighting very quickly. In 1957, Constance White talked to Greta in depth and wrote down her story just a few days after they met. She said that Greta's accounts were always the same and accurate, with no extraneous information or contradictions. just clear, sharp details that fit the situation and setting perfectly. In the 1960s, almost 10 years later, reporter Tim Dinsdale looked into the case again and talked to both Greta and Harry. Once more, their stories were the same. The memory was clear after all this time. In those interviews, they talked about the same creepy, alien thing they had seen that summer afternoon. Right down to the strange bumps on its head and the way its skin looked almost greasy. He finally spoke out in 2020, which was almost 70 years after that day. He agreed to talk on camera for the first time. He now lives alone in Perth, Scotland, and is old. What he said made an already strong account even stronger. Harry told his story. He had been fishing by himself that morning, and the splashing was the first thing that caught his attention. He quickly called his mother to warn her before the creature got too close to the pier. He could still remember how big it was, how slowly it moved, and how the two prongs on its head caught the light. He thought about how fear held him still as the thing slowly went under the water, leaving behind a midway-side foaming wake. His voice was clear, even after decades had passed. It fit what was said about him when he was a boy. Just when the argument seemed to be over, decades later, new proof would come out. A picture that was so sharp and clear that it brought up the question that had been around for hundreds of years and made everyone look more closely than ever. The skeptics strike back. People who are skeptical have never let the Greta Finlay meeting go without question. For them, what happened on August 20, 1952, wasn't a strange glimpse into the unknown. Instead, it was just a case of mistaken identity made worse by fear and the Loch Ness legend. Ronald Binns, Maurice Burton, and Stuart Campbell, who are at the forefront of this fight, say that the truth is much more mundane. Greta and her 13-year-old son Harry saw a red deer. This deer hypothesis quickly became the basis for the skeptical view. Binns and Burton said that the strange thing Greta said was on the creature's head. The two small, round shapes that she said looked like antennae on a snail were actually the antlers of a young stag. From the right angle, with the animal partially underwater, those antlers could look like straight sticks with rounded ends. They said that the dark, shiny skin that looked strange and slippery was just wet fur reflecting the noon sun across the water. Maurice Burton was especially sure that this theory was correct. After going to the spot and studying the weather, he even drew a picture of how a deer would look from the Finlay's view at Alduri Pier. Its head raised, its antlers shining, and only part of its body above the water. This picture, Bijiti, along with the moving light and rippling water, made a fantasy in his mind that was strong enough to fool anyone, especially someone who was caught off guard by something unexpected. Skeptics also stress how powerful expectations can be. People were already very interested in the Loch Ness Monster story by the early 1950s. The famous Arthur Grant drawing from 1934 and the sighting by Spicer in 1933 gave a very clear picture of what the monster was said to look like. Binns and Campbell say that Greta and Harry quickly made the connection between hearing splashing and seeing something strange moving in the water. In their shock and fear, the shape they saw wasn't just an animal. It turned into the monster they thought it was. Behavioral psychology backs up this point of view. When the brain comes across something new, it uses pictures and stories it has stored to figure out what it means. Fear speeds up this process, making memories clearer but blurring the details. Skeptics say that during those tense minutes, adrenaline and misunderstanding could have made them see a normal deer as something terrifying, causing its size and behavior to be exaggerated. The unique surroundings of Loch Ness make this point even stronger. The loch is short but deep, and the water is dark and almost clear. The sides of the loch rise sharply from the water. There, light bends and reflects in strange ways, distorting our view and making things look bigger, closer, or with strange shapes. Patterns can be created by waves from passing boats or quick changes in the wind. Floating debris can also look like it is moving on purpose. Skeptics say that in this setting, it doesn't take much for a normal sight to look strange. But as the deer theory was looked at more closely, holes started to show. The depth of the water is the main problem. The original 1903 map of the area and bathymetric studies show that 20 yards from Alduri Pier, which is where Greta said the creature stayed, the water drops to about 22 feet. That is way too deep for a deer to stand. Skeptics say that if it were swimming, its body should have been partly submerged, its head should have been stretched forward, and its ears should have been visible and twitching. Its movements should have been quick and deliberate. The thing Greta described doesn't fit. Its neck is straight up, its head is steady, and it's calm and almost still. Another issue that keeps coming up is behavior. Deer don't go down vertically and disappear below the water. They thrash, swim to safety, or float until they reach the land, even if they are not scared. The Finlays talked about something completely different, a slow, steady drop into the depths that left behind only waves and a shaky wake. One of the hardest things for skeptics to understand is that quiet, deliberate movement. Still, Binns, Burton, and Campbell say that people's perceptions aren't reliable when they're stressed, and that consistent evidence, no matter how strong, isn't proof. They say that memories can become stronger over time, becoming clear and certain even if the first way of seeing them was wrong. The things Greta and Harry saw were real to them, but what they saw was not a monster. That's where the argument gets tough. Skeptics use logic and chance to defend their beliefs, but the proof from that summer afternoon points to something else. Some things about the Finlay encounter are hard to explain, and it's this inability to be easily explained that makes believers look even deeper into the mystery, sure that what they saw in 1952 wasn't just a light trick. When science meets the unknown. Roland Watson, one of the most well-known and respected Loch Ness researchers today, has spent years studying the Greta Finlay sighting, and his work breaks down the deer theory into its many parts. His first and most important point is based on facts. Watson used the original 1933 bathymetric survey maps of Loch Ness to prove that the water drops to about 22 feet, 20 yards from Alduri Pier. These are the underwater charts that measure how deep the loch is. Just that one detail calls the whole deer theory into question. There was no way a deer, young or old, could have been standing there. What Greta and Harry said about its stance and behavior that day would have been very different if it had been swimming. Watson makes his point even stronger when he talks about behavior. Deer don't just disappear underwater. Animals that are scared thrash and run, either going for the land or swimming across the loch to get to safety. Nothing goes completely under the water and doesn't come back up. Instead, it leaves behind waves and a choppy wake, a creature that hung near the surface, calm and steady, before slipping below in a smooth, controlled motion, has been described by both Greta and Harry. This detail has been used in every version of the story for decades. Watson has also used current tools, such as Google Earth, to rebuild the Finlay's viewpoint at Alduri Pier. His study shows that there was a clear line of sight and that there were no rocks, logs, or other outcroppings in the area that could have been confused for the body or humps of a creature. This reconstruction clears up another layer of doubt, making it even clearer that the Finlays weren't looking through visual clutter or guessing at forms that were messed up by distance or obstruction. They had a good picture of what they saw. It's not just the technical proof that makes Watson's analysis stand out, though. It's also the patterns of credibility that surround the Finlay case. Greta's first statement to researcher Constance White which she gave just days after the meeting, is calm and full of details. There are no signs that she is lying. When Tim Dinsdale talked to her and Harry individually almost 10 years later, their stories were almost exactly the same, right down to the creature's size, shape, and even the way light sparkled off its skin. When Harry finally spoke out in public as an old man in 2020, decades later, his description stayed the same. There are no changing or exaggerated parts in these stories, which often fall apart when looked at more closely. Instead, they are solid memories of an event that left a lasting impression. That mark can't be missed. Both witnesses were deeply affected by what they saw that summer afternoon. Greta talked about being so scared that she couldn't move. Harry, a boy who loved fishing, never put a line in Loch Ness again. It's important to note that neither of them wanted fame, notice, or money from their story. Watson thinks that the fact that they aren't trying to get something for themselves makes them more sincere. They didn't have a reason to make up a story or keep it going for almost 70 years. Still, Watson knows what all good investigators know. Eyewitness evidence has limits. Fear, shock, and excitement can change the way you remember things, making some facts clearer and others less clear. The brain can get size, distance, or speed wrong when it's under a lot of stress. In the case of Finlay, though, the fact that they were consistent across multiple interviews, some of which took place years or even decades apart, shows that while no one's memory is perfect, the core of what they remember is true. The long, straight neck, the shiny black skin, and the strange bumps on the head are too clear and stable to be explained away as fear-based confusion or mass fantasy. The new image. It began like any other calm morning at Loch Ness, until a man with a camera caused a storm without meaning to. As he stood close to the shore, he saw movement in the still water and automatically raised his camera. In a split second, a set of pictures was taken that would be seen all over the world. When the first picture of the Loch Ness monster appeared on social media, the story had already gone viral. The pictures were the best ever taken of the monster. Everyone in the world gasped when they zoomed in. It was impossible to look away from the close-up. There, in the frame of the roiling black water, was a shape that fit what witnesses had said decades before. The smooth, shiny skin sparkled just like Greta Finlay had said it would in 1952. A dark, smooth neck rose above the water. Behind it, small bumps in the water, exactly aligned, showed that there was a huge body just below the surface. There was no blur or shadow. It was clear, sharp, and undeniable enough to start a new wave of interest and discussion. Cryptozoologists were thrilled and called the picture historic corroboration. They saw it as a visual link between new proof and eyewitness accounts that have been consistent for 70 years. For them, this wasn't just another blurry picture. It was a missing piece of the puzzle that showed all the stories and reports, from Mackenzie's letter to Finlay's meeting, were connected. But doubt came up just as quickly. Wildlife and image experts warned that the strange clarity could be due to reflections, light distortions, or even digital edits. Others said the humps might be caused by a big fish breaching, a group of rocks, or the wake of a passing boat that was twisted by the currents in the loch. Soon after, the picture was looked at by a forensics expert. Pixel mapping showed that there were no clear signs of editing, and studies of depth and perspective showed that the object in the shot was big, much bigger than any fish that lives in the loch. A study of motion blur even found a faint wake pattern that fit with something slowly moving and not floating. Even with all of this, there was still no clear answer, only more questions. Modern sonar sweeps and drone explorations have added to the puzzle. They have sometimes found strange shapes deep below the surface, shapes that are too big to be animals and move in ways that no known animal in the loch should. But proof is still hard to find. Loch Ness is very big, very deep, and very cloudy. It's like a natural vault where everything stays hidden forever. The mystery of Loch Ness is far from over. Like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives, and click the next video on your screen to keep exploring the world's greatest unsolved mysteries.